So, good evening. On behalf of Connacht Athletics, welcome to the first in a series of workshops designed at upskilling the members of Connacht Athletics and indeed Irish Athletics and further afield, and also trying to liven up your January evenings in lockdown. First of all, to open tonight's session, I'd like to introduce the chairman of Connacht Athletic Council, Mr. Brian Bruton, to say a few words. Brian is really the driving force behind everything that's good in Connacht Athletics, and he's also the PRO of Galway Athletics, so he's very, very interested in this. So I'll hand it over to you, Brian, to say a few words.
Okay, thanks, Pierce. Can everybody hear me? Good evening, everybody, and thanks to Pierce O'Callaghan and Michelle Sammet for joining us this evening. It's probably a first for Connacht to get a couple of well-known World Athletics personnel to join us on our usual meetings. So, yeah, as Pierce said, we're delighted to get everybody here. Our aim is to get the social media element of athletics kind of first and foremost, I guess, among the public. And in general, we're trying to boost the profile of athletics. There's not many events going on this side of the world, but there are events happening worldwide, and we want to keep athletics in the spotlight. We want to keep athletes, young people, parents, coaches, everybody, officials engaged and interested in the sport. And by inviting Michelle here on this evening, we're hoping to get an insight into how to boost social media across the various platforms. I mean, some of us here will know a lot about them. Many of us won't know much about them at all, or some might be new. So I think it'll be a learning experience for everybody, and hopefully we'll all pick up something and be able to kind of promote the sport even more in the next, particularly in this difficult time. And hopefully before long we'll be all back at events enjoying sport in real time in the flesh. And just one other thing I'd like to mention this evening. Many of you will be aware that Jerry Kiernan passed away yesterday, Irish Olympian, 9th in the LA Olympics marathon with 2:12. It's 17 international caps for Ireland, and was well known as an athlete, coach, and obviously we'd like to sympathise with his club, and more importantly with his family and friends. He's been one of the great characters of athletics over the years, and many of you know from TV appearances as well. So it's a real shock and a sad day for athletics. So maybe we'll take a moment to just reflect on his contribution to the sport and remember him, and try to carry on as he would have after this. So we just take a short moment to remember him. Okay, thanks very much. So we will kick off. Pierce, do you want to introduce Michelle maybe, and we can get the ball rolling then? So I'll hand you over back to Pierce, and we'll get going with the presentation.
Thank you, and I want to just thank the Connacht Council as well for their full support in this initiative. And I especially want to thank everybody on the call here for giving up their time. You're to be admired for upskill yourselves. It's a dark January Thursday night, and there's not much happening. So it's great to take an opportunity to upskill ourselves. And probably like a lot of you, I learn my social media, as we say, on the street, as opposed to formally. That's just the way it has been. But I can say with Michelle, it's ironic. I was just thinking, I attended a little talk Michelle gave in the World Athletics head office in Monaco last February. I don't know if Michelle remembers it. It's actually the last time I was on an airplane. 52, nearly 52 weeks ago. It's incredible. I've been on a flight since then. But we are privileged, guys. Just to maybe, before I introduce Michelle, just to maybe talk the evening, we're going to keep it quite informal. If you could ask everybody to mute themselves, that would really help to ensure that we can all hear Michelle loud and clear. We welcome questions. So I'm aware a lot of you have been in contact with me. There's going to be a lot of questions. What I suggest is if you could put any questions you have in the chat box, and I'll stop Michelle along the way when the questions are appropriate. So we'll have a kind of an interactive on it, but there's no such thing as a stupid question. We probably have all various levels of social media understanding on the call, but please don't feel intimidated in any way. No matter how simple your question is, ask it. Now is your chance. Michelle is an expert on two levels, I suppose. She's an expert in athletics, but she's also an expert on digital. And just a bit of an overview of how fortunate we are to have her. Michelle Samet is a freelance consultant around all things digital strategies and communication in and around athletics. She's a German native, but she spent almost 8 years of her life living, studying and working in the UK, but she's now back in Germany and she works around the world from her German base. She started her career working with IAAF, called World Athletics, creating content for a variety of digital outlets, including all social media channels, as well as the Spikes magazine and online event. And over the last few years, she's taken on a role of stakeholder communications, and she works closely with the athletes, member federations, and then the various meetings from the league to Continental Tour to World Indoor Tour, and all those various high-level meetings to grow their social media knowledge and their storytelling skill set. And then on top of that job, she also works with the World Athletics editorial team on content ideas and creation. She works with the likes of European Athletics and the Label Road Races as a commentator and announcer, always with the aim to provide a unique insight and to excite fans about her sport. So without further ado, Michelle, I'm very happy to hand over to you. I just want to say a huge thank you to Michelle. If I could just explain to everybody on the call, the reason why I haven't been pushing Michelle's credentials so highly is because she's very highly sought after. And if the rest of the world knew that Connacht had bagged her for an hour of her time, we would probably be competing against some big clubs and federations around the world. But she's chosen to give her time to us, so it's a privilege for us, and we look forward to receiving the questions. And I'll hand it over to you, Michelle. And just one last reminder for everybody to mute themselves if you can. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Piers. Don't know really what to say after that. As you wouldn't have said, because you're too polite to say that, but I actually feel quite honored to be on here, and I've made the effort to get changed out of my usual jogging bottoms because Piers was on a call with me earlier and I wasn't wearing any makeup and wearing a woolly jumper. So thanks for having me. I hope it's useful, and as Piers says, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Piers, interrupt me whenever anything doesn't make sense or there are questions in the chat, and I'll get started. I've tried to divide it up into a bit of an overview of the digital landscape as a whole, just explaining a bit of terminology I'll be using. So as Piers mentioned, I think everybody is at a different level. So trying to explain some of the key terminology that I'll be using and a quick summary of some of the main platforms that I think most of you are familiar with. Then quickly look at some strategies that might just get you thinking about how to differently approach social media platforms, some tips on best practice for the various platforms, and then also how you can utilize your own personal channels to help grow the sport and to help promote your clubs. This slide I've only really wanted to include, and it's just looking at digital around the world. The data is from October last year. I think it's the most recent one that I could get. They normally come out every 3 or 4 months, and I think the next one's due next month. But I just really want to show how big digital media has become, and for a lot of organizations, especially at a more local level and regional levels, it is still an afterthought. And looking at the numbers there, just in terms of active social media users around the world, 4.14 billion. It can't be an afterthought anymore. It's something that you actively have to think about. It's something that you have to form strategies about. But at the same time, it's also a massive opportunity, because it means that even if you are a local club or if you are a region, there is actually relevance in what you're putting out there, and it's so much easier for you than it ever has been to reach a lot of people. If you're doing something great and people will notice it and share it, it'll reach more people. So it's actually a great opportunity to grow beyond just your local following as such, or people who would normally have in the past engaged with your content. So that's the reason why I've thrown this in there. In terms of terminology, as I said, I don't want to go into too much detail, and some of you will know all of this, and it might be irrelevant for me to talk about this, but just so we all get to a kind of common denominator here, I've mapped out or picked out a couple of terms that are used frequently that maybe not everybody is familiar with. So when we're looking at a post, or we're talking about a post, we're talking about a piece of content that is uploaded and shared to a social media platform. And that can be anything. It can be just text, it can be images, it can be video. And it means that it's sitting on your channel, whether that's Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, permanently. So people can go back and revisit that. It's similar to when you publish something to your website. A story, for example, is a short piece of content, and that is often recorded as live, and it's uploaded to the various platforms' story functions. Everybody has stories now. Twitter's introduced fleets now, so they've just jumped on the bandwagon there. But it's basically a short piece of content that is uploaded to that function, and that tends to disappear after 24 hours. So unlike the post, it tends to just be there temporarily. It's a lot more colloquial, and in an ideal world, it's optimized for portrait format. Chronological timeline means that all the content from accounts that you are following, or users that you're following, or that you're liking, is shown to you in real time in the order that it is posted. So Twitter is very much still like this if you select that option, and it means that it's normally the best way to follow rolling news. I'm sure a lot of you were yesterday glued to Twitter and the watching, but that means a chronological timeline, which sadly most platforms have moved away from, and they've moved towards algorithms, and that is a lot more complicated, and I'm not going into too much detail about explaining how everything works because it differs from platform to platform, but it's basically a set of mathematical instructions that calculates which content is shown to you as a user based on how you have previously interacted on that platform, and it tries to work out what it thinks is most relevant to you. So it's pretty much the opposite of chronological timeline, and it makes it a lot harder for you, especially if you're posting from a club page, or if you're posting from bigger organization pages, to actually get on people's timelines, even if they like your page. So that's something to think about, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail later, and how to get around that. Geotagging means that you're attaching a geographic coordinate to the content that you're uploading. So on Instagram, for example, selecting the location where you're publishing this from, and you don't have to necessarily be in that location, but just if you're, again, talking about your club, or where a competition is held, tagging exactly the stadium or the area or the city where this is, it means that you're attaching that information to it, and it helps with discoverability. Hashtag is a word or a phrase that is preceded by the hash sign, and is used on social media, especially Twitter and Instagram, to identify messages on specific topics. So and I'll talk about this in a little more detail later, but on Twitter, it's more about joining conversations, whereas on Instagram, it's about being part of a specific subject. So there's differences in how hashtags are used on different platforms. And then the last one is organic reach, which is the number of people who see your content without paid distribution, because I imagine most of you don't really have any budgets to go spending the big bucks on trying to get paid promotions on your followers' timeline. So it's about how can you grow your organic reach, and without spending any money on any of these platforms, to reach the most amount of people and in the most effective way. Any questions up until this point? I don't think there's anything in the chat. I'll just keep going, and if there's anything coming in, I'll wait for Piers to interrupt me. In terms of platforms, I'm looking at what I like to call the big three, because I think they're the ones that are still at the moment most relevant to individuals and organizations. We've got Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. There's different audiences on each of these platforms, so it's important to understand what each platform's strengths are and what they're good for. Facebook's still by far the biggest. It's got the most monthly active users. And although a lot of people are moving to other platforms, it is still, in terms of people that use it, the biggest one, which means it's also got the greatest potential to reach the most people. The way that they've changed content is that they're really looking for video content, live content. They're trying to push paid very strongly, which again, there's ways around that we'll look at, so you don't have to go spending a lot of money. And they've recently shifted a lot of their algorithm, the way that it's built, back to what Facebook used to be way back when it was founded. And it's all about creating a community and encouraging conversations around topics that are relevant to yourself and the people that engage with yourself, rather than just being a platform where you talk to people. Instagram is one of the fastest growing platforms still. It's recently, or at some point last year or end of 2019, reached the 1 billion monthly active user mark. And it's the best visual expression of yourself or your club, because it is all about visuals. You don't need long captions. We also often say it's the most multinational because people respond to images. So even if there is a lack of understanding of captions, people just respond to what they know. So they see an image and they recognize someone, and it's the most interactive in that sense. You can be really creative with the content you put on there. It's a bit more fun. The audience is a bit younger, and you can just encourage people to engage more. It's also fairly easy to reach new audiences through likes of hashtags. As I said, on Instagram, a lot is more about discoverability, whereas on Twitter, it's more about joining conversations. And again, you can easily get on people's timelines through location tagging and geotagging. Stories, as I mentioned earlier, it's great for behind the scenes access. So stuff that you would normally post on your profile tends to be a little more polished, a bit of high quality video photos, whereas the stories aspect of things, it can be a bit more spontaneous. It doesn't have to be a high quality picture. It can be just taken on a phone, or it can be graphics where you're posting things like timetables or results and so forth, because those things don't tend to get too much engagement on your platform and on the feed itself, but it's information that is relevant normally for about 24 hours. So it works really well there. And then on Twitter, it's an interesting one because the monthly active users aren't the biggest. So it's not the biggest in terms of size, but it's got the most influential people on it. And I think we were all quite happy when we saw certain people not getting the platform anymore, but it's still got, in terms of the media that's out there, in terms of the news that come through Twitter, it is the most influential, because that's where everything happens in real time, because they still have the option of a chronological timeline. It's great for one-on-one engagement because you can respond to accounts, you can engage with one another. And it's also a great place for personality. You don't just have to stick to one subject if you're an individual. You can talk about other interests that you have. So that's an overview. I've just seen there is a question on hashtags. So the question is, can you create a hashtag for any subject? Yes, you can. So especially if you're organizing events or if you have a club, think about a hashtag that could be relevant in the long term. So for example, if it's about championships or an event that you're hosting all the time, then it might make sense to consistently use that particular hashtag so people can always find content relating to that. It can be a hashtag for your club. And then there are the more generic ones. So as I said, on Instagram, it can just be hashtag athletics, or it can be hashtag track and field. And that means that anyone that goes on that hashtag ends up seeing all content that has been posted with this hashtag attached. But that also means that if it's a very generic one, people are less likely to actually end up on your post, just because there's so much content out there. So for discoverability, it's great. If you want people to engage in a conversation, it's better to have a more dedicated niche hashtag and make sure that people are aware of it. So if you have any promotion materials, or if you're running an account, make sure people know what the official hashtags are and that they can engage with that. Summarizing this, one of the reasons, again, why we're doing this is because we think it's really important for everyone to recognize the power of your social media channels, both for clubs and for individuals. But as Spider-Man had to learn, with great power comes great responsibility. Some people have got into hot waters by posting the wrong things or controversial things. So it's always better to wait and reconsider whether something that could be perceived in a difficult way or in a controversial way, maybe read it, save it, and go back to it 10 minutes later, or maybe ask somebody else for feedback. But I'm not here to tell you what you shouldn't post, but what you should do and what you should think about. There's the question between public versus private. On Facebook profiles, so the ones that every individual tends to have, they're often more for friends and family, so they're a lot more personal. And those are maybe things that, especially athletes that I work with a lot of times, that's something that you might want to keep on private, because that's not necessarily something that your fans should consider or that concern themselves with. Facebook pages, those are the things that operate similarly to how you would operate, say, a Twitter account. That makes sense to have it public. That's where you post official communication, anything that you want people to really know about. And you can have, if you have a Facebook profile, it's easy to then set up a page either for yourself if you are a professional, or for your club or something that you are running. Twitter, as I said, is very news driven. It's very public, so it's a great way to share ideas and to engage with others. And Instagram can be a bit of both, and that's where you have to think about how you want to use it. It's a great place to share the behind the scenes access that maybe not everybody gets to see. If you're an athlete, for example, for a club, it can be a great way to engage with people and show off anything that you're doing at the community. If, for example, you do a lot of stuff with young kids and activities around that, and you're trying to keep just people, members of your club, informed, maybe in that case, it makes sense to have it as a private account and let people in as you wish, because there's always the issue, of course, of who you're allowed to use images of, and something to be mindful of. Whatever you choose to do with your accounts, it's important that you make sure your profile is up to date and accurately represents who you are and what you do. Because there's nothing worse than going on an account and not really knowing whether they're the official account, or not seeing that it says last posted in 2012, and maybe there's another account that looks similar to that one and they've posted recently. So just making sure that everything is up to date and tells people exactly what exactly the account is. If there's a website attached to it that they can go to, just to give that information. Question: do clubs generally have 2 Facebook pages, or do you want to read the question, Piers? Is that easier?
No, either. No, go ahead. You're doing great. You don't need me.
Maybe it is good if you read them, just so interrupt my talking for a minute.
You can get a drink, Michelle. So yes, this is a really important page, I think, for everybody. And there's a question I have here as well to educate, because I found out last year. So before I asked that question, Michelle mentioned when a page has likes. So most of the clubs that are on here would have a page that you click like and you follow the news. And let's assume you have 1,000 likes, and you assume you put out a news story tomorrow, then it's going to that 1,000. It goes to about 20% of the 1,000. Isn't that the reality, Michelle? For everybody, so 20% of it, which is shocking news for everybody. I mean, when you put it on your Facebook personal page, you assume everybody gets it, but when you've got a page that has a like on it, it goes to about 20% of that audience. Am I right on that, Michelle? Yeah.
Yeah, the way that the algorithm works, and Instagram does it in a very similar way, is that, say, as you said, if you have 100 followers and you post something, it will then only choose to present it to, say, about 20 of those people, and we'll see how do they interact with it. If it's really popular, if loads of people like it or comment on it, it'll then choose to show it to another 20 people, and if they do, it shows it to more. Whereas if not many people at the start of you posting it interact with it, it then only shows it to another 10 and sees how they interact with it, and then maybe a few days later shows it to another few people, and if it gets shared more, then it spreads out more. So that's something to think about. And the other thing, and I do get to that a bit further down the line, is also making sure that relevant information on Facebook in particular is posted directly to Facebook. So if you have a press release, rather than linking to the story on your website, it actually makes sense to put the whole text on the Facebook page, because Facebook doesn't like you going away from Facebook. But that's, yeah, as I said, I'll get to that later further down the line.
Great. And then this is a question from Noel. He just says, do clubs generally have 2 Facebook pages, or how do they manage between club members and external audience? I'll let you answer.
So I think what I would do with clubs is that you have one official page where you can gather all kinds of information, and you can choose to do various things with it. So you can choose who has access to post on that page. So if you say you have a few club members that have access to post content on there, that can manage and interact with people, that's always good. You can also within that page set up groups. So if there is, for example, any particular topic where you want to encourage a lot of exchange on, you can set up a group within that, and in there everyone can post, and you can really have conversations and people can share ideas. It also means more monitoring. I mean, in an ideal world, nobody misbehaves, but on social media, because sometimes it's anonymous, people do like to branch out. So what I would recommend is having that official page for the club, and then each individual member, of course, can have their own profile and can engage with content on there and can comment as themselves rather than as a page. I hope that answers that question. Very quickly, just continuing on from there, as I said earlier, important thing to remember is that people will only engage with your accounts if there's actually something to engage with. So if I end up seeing that you guys somebody is hosting an event and I want to look up whether there's any information on any of your social channels on this particular event, and it says last posted in August 2015, I won't be following, because I don't see any point in following that channel, because it doesn't seem to be providing me with up-to-date information. So for somebody to be encouraged to follow you or to like your page, you should at least make a bit of an effort. I know that especially if you haven't got anyone dedicated to run pages, or if it's a voluntary basis, you can't expect somebody to upload content every day, every week, but just making sure to provide the occasional update, and to make sure that something is posted, whether that's once a month or however it works for you, but you have some kind of rhythm, then people will know that there is some value in following that page. With all of these platforms, there's no one-size-fits-all approach, and yeah, we'll get into that in a bit more detail shortly. But overall, with anything, positivity outweighs negativity. So the more positive messages that you can spread through your channels, the more likely people are to engage with it, the more likely they are to share it, and the more eyeballs you are likely to get on your content. So when wording stuff, when sharing images, people will always respond more to a smiling face than somebody sitting there grumpily or something. So that's something to think about, and also in the tone of voice that you are using, and how you are sharing messages, and the approach that you do take to your platforms. And then also it's about knowing that all of these platforms have different audiences. So it's good for you to have a think about who do you actually talk to. So I've got an example of this in a couple of slides, actually really looking at what kind of people are on which platform, and then based on that thinking about which information is actually relevant for me to put on this particular platform. With regards to tone of voice, the question that's come in, I will get back to that because I have a separate slide on that. So I'll park this question for now, if I may, and I'll elaborate on that in a minute. Now, strategies. I think we're still in this position where a lot of people think that social media is something you can just do on the go. You'll just post anything that you like and it'll sort itself out. And for an individual, that's a lot easier to do than when you're doing it for an organization or for a brand. And so what's important for you to think about is actually, what is my objective? What am I hoping to achieve with my social media platforms? How much effort do I put into each of them? Does it make sense to have all of them, or does it make sense for me to focus all of my efforts in one particular one? Those objectives can be something like, is the main purpose of my channels to distribute news, updates, or any kind of information to my stakeholders? And I've put a little asterisk there, because the other question that you should ask yourself is, who are your stakeholders? Who are the people that you are talking to? And are those the people that you're currently talking to the people that you want to talk to? Is it about just keeping your club members informed? Is it about the community? Is it about media? Is it about potential sponsors? So there's all of this that you should ask yourself is actually, who do we, if we're talking about clubs in particular, talk to, and who do we want to talk to? The other example of objectives could be you just trying to entertain fans of the sport or engage with athletics fans and try and get people excited about the sport. Is it about reaching new audiences? So you might have a great connection with your club members, but you're trying to reach out into the broader community, try to reach the more recreational athletes or sports fans. Is it because you want to provide more value to existing sponsors or potentially attract new sponsors that could somehow support you? And how can your channels help you with that? If you can show that you have more and more brands are, and I don't like the term influencer, and I'm not a big fan of the concept of it, but more and more brands are investing in what we call micro influencers. So people that haven't got loads of followers, but people that will have medium-sized following, but their following is really engaged and really passionate about a particular subject. And it works the same with organizations. If a potential sponsor sees, if they're trying to reach active people between the ages of 20 and 40, and they know that those are the people that participate in your club or in the sport, and those are the people that follow your accounts, then it's more incentive for them to invest in your club and support those people. So those are all things that you can think about in terms of what are you actually trying to achieve with your social media channels. And also, different platforms can serve different objectives. Your Instagram account may be all about engaging and just inspiring people. Your Twitter account may be all about informing people. So you don't have to do the same type of thing with exactly every single platform. Here we get to tone of voice. I promised you I was getting to it. So think about the kind of content you're publishing on each of these platforms. What is your, or are your unique selling points as a club? Is it the athletes that you have there? Is it the history that the club has? Is it where you are, the location, your facilities? Is it the community that you're in and the activities that you're providing? And pick out one or two of those and build everything that you do on platforms around this, because this is what makes you unique. This is what makes you stand out, and this is what makes people care about what you're actually posting. We always have this whenever we produce content for World Athletics or any organizations that I work with, we always say is, if you don't care, you won't share. And what we want people to do is actually share the content that you're putting out there, because if you're exciting them, if you make them feel strongly about what it is that you've put out there, if they want to share it with their following, you've done a good job. And that should always be the ultimate goal. And then this is now the tone of voice thing is, how do you actually want to be perceived by your audience? Are you an authoritative figure or organization? Are you just trying to enforce rules or keep people updated about COVID hygiene protocols and facilities access and so forth? Are you trying to be more human and kind of almost speak as an organization as the people of your club, for example? Are you just trying to get people excited about the sport? Is it all about being fun and engaging? Those are all things you should also think about. And I think especially for an organization, it's a lot harder to answer those questions than it is for an individual, because as an individual, you always already have a kind of way that you are talking and that you're writing emails and so forth. Whereas as an organization, it's really about, how do I want to be perceived by the people that follow me? And how do I want to talk to them? So again, as I said, with a lot of these other things, it doesn't have to be the same for every single platform. Again, if I compare this to things we do with World Athletics, the way that our TikTok looks compared to the Twitter account or compared to the Facebook account they all sound differently and they use different language, and one uses more emojis than the others, and some uses a lot more colloquialisms. But it's because we know that on TikTok and on Instagram, the audience is a lot younger, and the people that engage with our content, versus to Twitter, where a lot of the people that follow are media professionals, and in general, more professional people, as you were. So that's something to also think about.
Michelle, if I could just jump in as well, maybe just give you a little drink as well as a break. A lot of the people on this call would be involved in juvenile sport. So it's important as well, the parents, you'd be communicating a lot with the parents. And I have a lot of, I would say, I edit probably 7 or 8 club pages, and I get lots of criticism for various things. And just some of the things are GDPR is important. So even putting a graph of a group of kids up on a cross-country team or a team sport, you know, you're not allowed to mention the names, which is just a crazy part of life, but it's reality, and you get criticized for naming the athletes. And then, you know, another one is, you know, if 10 athletes in the club are racing in the cross-country race, like, I would believe in putting in the position of each of those 10 athletes, because I feel that's important to report on the results. But you'll also get criticized then for showing up the kids who've been down the field, the ones who are in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s. So, you know, we took a policy in the club here, just we'd name the first 3 or 4, and then, you know, they were ported by the other 6 or 7. So it's a really important part as well of the social media side of things. Just be careful of your audience, because in a club which is dealing with juvenile sport, it's the parents mainly that are going to be reading the posts, not the kids themselves, by and large. So it's just something to be aware of as well.
Absolutely, very, very good point. Audiences and purpose, you've perfectly let me in there, because who is your audience on which platform? The question you should always ask yourself with anything that you put out there is, who are you creating content for? What is it that you want to communicate? Where do you actually find them? And I'm not saying outside anywhere, but on which platform? And how can you actually deliver your message in the most effective way? And by how, I mean in what type of content way. So if it's something about inspiring, it might not necessarily be the best way to just write a text post. It might be better to create a video to go with this. Or if it's about putting something in perspective, you might want to attach an image to it. So think about it in a visual way as well. If you are looking at the breakdown, and this doesn't necessarily have to look like this for you, but it's an example of how you can look at different platforms, is if you actually divide your audience and the purpose of each platform. So if we're looking at Twitter, as I said, a lot of people that are on there are media professionals, athletics fans. Your athletes are probably on there if they're old enough to be on these platforms, and it's got a lot more international reach because of the way that the platform operates. And you retweet something and it instantly gets to an extra person's audience and so forth. And with that, you then ask yourself, okay, what purpose does this platform serve for me as a club? Is it informing? It's keeping people updated, considering that it's a lot about news and distributing updates. You can drive people to the website, because on Twitter, you don't get punished for linking externally by an algorithm. So it's about if you have a long story on the website, whether that's race reports or any press release or anything like this, it does make sense to, for example, put it on there. And Instagram, for example, has a lot more younger fans and athletes on there. So it's a different audience to the parents that are on Facebook. And that can be more about, say, engaging with them and entertaining and encouraging them to interact with your content and providing them that behind the scenes access. And then Facebook tends to be probably, I'm guessing, your the members of your clubs. It's general sports fans that tend to be quite opinionated. It's a more mature audience compared to, for example, the Instagram audiences, and oftentimes it's more local. So you won't necessarily have just a generic athletics fan from somewhere in the States following a club page, but it's probably more likely going to be someone from the local community, someone from the area, maybe someone from the local paper, and as Piers mentioned, the likes of parents of kids and so forth. And there it should all be about driving conversation about positive subjects. It's about building a community, spreading news about things, helping each other out. And the big thing that Facebook really likes, as I said earlier, is video. So if you are putting on events, and if you have any capacities to stream anything or work with the likes of Athletics Ireland, if they are putting something out there and there are athletes from your clubs participating, sharing those things, that's a really big bonus. There's 2 questions.
Yeah, just on 2 points on that, I was going to say, for everybody, given the COVID restrictions, I think Facebook Live is going to become a lot more important in future, because parents and families and spectators may not be allowed to attend athletic events. But Jennifer just asked the question, if a parent shares a post on Facebook and names the kids, is the club in breach of GDPR? My answer to that would probably be no, they're not. The parent isn't liable for GDPR, and that's one way of getting around it, all right. If anyone else has a comment, feel free to share it. I've had GDPR thrown at me many times, even naming teams and things like that. So it is a challenging part, but it's the law and that's the reality. And then Bashir just made up a point, Michelle, do you get punished for linking things? I think maybe just clarify that it's the Facebook punishment you're talking about. It's not really punished, it's just not promoted. But I'll leave it to you.
Yes. I might have worded this slightly difficult, but basically, as I said earlier, this algorithm that is trying to present people what it thinks that, or presents you as a user what it thinks you like based on what you have interacted with, it also rewards you for staying on Facebook. So Facebook really wants people to upload video on Facebook rather than uploading something to YouTube and then posting the YouTube link on Facebook. And similarly, if you're, as I said earlier, if you have a press release or a news story that you are publishing on your website, Facebook ideally wants you to publish that story on Facebook rather than just publishing the link to your website. Just because of the way that it works and the way it works with advertisers, it wants you to stay on Facebook and not go away from it. So the punishment is that it doesn't necessarily show your content to as many people. Out of the 100 that we said earlier, it might only show it to 10 people at first, and if they really engage with it, then it'll show it to more people. And there you can link away from it, so I'm not saying don't ever do it, just do it in moderation, as with everything.
Thanks, Michelle. I've just answered that question in the box, so don't worry, you can move on.
Okay, great. Looking at best practices, so I've done one page for each of those 3 platforms. That'll hopefully help a little bit in the way that you put content out there. As I said earlier, on Twitter, have a credible and complete profile. So make sure that if it's a club, say exactly that it is a club, it has the title, it has your club logo, a link to the website, and those kind of information on there. Tweet when people are online. So as I said, for Twitter, it's the one platform that still has a chronological timeline. So people will see when you post something at that time. Normally, it's of course difficult to know when all of your followers are online, but you will tend to see there are normally certain times of the day or certain days when your followers are more active. So for example, if you have an event on and you know that people will be looking for results and it's live, then it makes sense to publish those as you go along, because people will be looking for those. At the same time, with regards to times, we always, as a rule of thumb, the key times when people tend to be online is around just before 9 a.m, it's around noon, it's around 5 p.m, and it's around 8 or 9 p.m. And that's because in the morning, it's just before people start work, it's around lunchtime when they have a break, it's around 5 p.m. when they finish work or when they're commuting home on public transport, which at the moment not many do. And again, it's in the evening while maybe watching TV or just before going to bed. So those are normally, if you are trying to get something out there, that's normally when it makes sense to publish something. Maybe for a breaking news story, 9 p.m. isn't the best option. It might make sense to go with a 9 a.m. or noon slot, but that's, as a rule of thumb, if you haven't got the insights when your followers are online, that's always a good good way to start. Keep it short and sweet. in the past, Twitter used to only be 140 characters. There's no need to always use up the 280 character limit. You don't have to try and fill it up with unnecessary words. People have the attention span of a goldfish, so you don't need to go into too much detail. You can say it in a visual or short way. Again, and not because of algorithm purposes, but because of the way that people use the platform, post directly on Twitter. There are a lot of people that have their Instagram accounts linked to their Facebook pages and to their Twitter pages. And the way it then shows up is that when you publish something on Instagram, it then goes automatically to Twitter, and it just has part of your caption, depending on how long it is, and a link to the Instagram page. But because it only shows the link, it doesn't even show a preview of the picture, and the caption sometimes isn't the right length, and it picks up some of the hashtags that you might have used on Instagram that don't really work on Twitter. It just doesn't work, and those don't really tend to get engagement. People aren't encouraged to go on your Twitter, on your Instagram page, and it just doesn't really do the job. Whereas if you just take the extra 2 minutes to, if you also want to share that particular piece of content on Twitter, if you just take the 2 minutes to copy the caption that you've written on Instagram and you publish that particular picture on Twitter directly with that caption and tweet it, it will get far more reach, and people will be far more likely to engage with it because it's more visual, and they will see a picture or a video that is attached to it rather than just a link where they don't know where it takes them and they can't really be bothered to look at. Interact with your peers. It's a great platform for interaction, whether that is clubs between themselves. I don't like to make football examples, but some football clubs, especially smaller and lower league ones, are actually really good at that, in joining conversations with some of the bigger clubs by bringing themselves into conversations and being visible with that particular following, and also with the athletes in your clubs or something like that. So really make use of the fact that you can respond to tweets, or that you can quote tweet and add information to it. Going back to the hashtags, you can use hashtags to join conversation, but don't just hashtag random words like you would on Instagram. So as I said, for me, I always say, don't ever use more than 2 hashtags in a tweet. Ideally, just use 1, and you don't have to use 1 at all. So it's not compulsory that every tweet needs to include a hashtag. If you're talking about a specific event, then it 100% makes sense to use that official hashtag, because you do appear in that conversation. If you're talking about a TV series, it's all these things where you're contributing to a conversation around a particular subject, then it makes sense. But if you're broadly talking about athletics, in an ideal world, your followers will know that you're talking about athletics, and you don't have to hashtag that for them to understand. Use Twitter's engagement tools. They've by now built quite a few, so you can do polls, you can quote tweet and add to conversations. So if, say, Athletics Ireland is putting some information out for clubs about maybe current COVID restrictions, rather than just retweeting it, maybe there's some particular information that is relevant to your following. So rather than just retweeting it, you can quote tweet it and direct people and say, this is important because it contains the following information, and so forth. The last thing on Twitter is just be visual. So don't just rely on text. If you have any images, video, emojis, people do respond to colors. So the more or the longer something is, or the more space it takes up on somebody's timeline, the more likely they are to engage with it. So as a rule of thumb on social media, we say you have about 3 seconds to capture somebody's attention. So if you're imagining you have your phone and you're going through a Twitter or an Instagram timeline, the chance to actually, as somebody goes through, to make them stop and read what it is that you've posted, or to look at the picture longer than a second, you have only 3 seconds. So what you're posting should somehow grab somebody's attention, and that can be a striking image, or it can just be 3 words that do exactly what you want them to say.
Thanks, Michelle. Just a quick one on that, for you to explain it to people, and you can get a drink. So the random hashtags and with full respect, and it's a very sad day for Irish athletics, Jerry Kiernan's death today. But and I wanted to see what people were saying about him, but the people that put on a tweet when they say things like hashtag devastated or hashtag Clonliffe legend, they're not going to be picked up anywhere for people to see. So if I just do a Twitter search that just says Jerry Kiernan, I'll find out everybody who has tweeted about him, and that can be about an event, national championships or regional championships or whatever. So I think that's a really important point. Even though we're talking now, we can say things like, oh God, I'm hashtag starving or whatever. That's fine, but in a tweet, the hashtag should be where people can search to join the conversation. Yesterday was a big example of hashtag inauguration. So people are commenting on Joe Biden, the end of Trump, things that the young girl who said the poem, Gareth Brooks, whatever. But the inauguration hashtag was what engaged everybody. But that's clearly a bigger event. And then, Michelle, you might just talk. It's something I haven't done about delaying a tweet with a date or a time. I've never actually done that. I'd love to learn how to do it. So.
There's different tools to do that, and it's super useful, especially if you know that you won't have time if you know that you want something to go out at a specific time, but you won't have time to do it at that time. TweetDeck is a really simple way to do it. It's just you can link your Twitter account to do that, and you literally just select, you write it all out and you select schedule rather than tweet, and you put the date and time in. I think on the app you can't do it at the moment. I think that's something that they are working on. Yeah, no, on the app you can't do it yet. There are other tools that are free. We use a lot of, we use Buffer, which again, you can sign up for free. You link your account to it and you can schedule content, pictures, videos, links to website. It also shortens them, so it's a little more digestible. And there are various, so that works for Twitter. There is Sprout Social, but I think that costs something. It gives you more insights and stuff. But the easiest ones to use really are TweetDeck and Buffer. And I think on desktop, Twitter now has the option to also schedule when you go into that. So I can look into that. But yeah, those are the easiest ones to use. Facebook has it built in. So if you manage pages and you go on facebook.com/creator studio, and I'll write that in the chat before I forget it. You can actually manage all of the content that you are posting. So you can upload videos on there, you can title them correctly, you can tag them, and you can schedule them for a later stage. You can even link your Instagram account to that because Instagram is owned by Facebook, and you can manage your content from there. So you don't actually have to post all of your content on Instagram through your phone. You can also do it via desktop, which personally I find it a lot easier because you can actually read what you're writing and then manage it a lot closer. So that helps. Facebook.com Creator Studio. That's the link that when you're managing a page, you should work for you. So that's Twitter. There's somebody else. Hootsuite is another one. Thanks for mentioning that. That's a great one to schedule tweets. Instagram. Briefly touched upon that earlier. Try and use good quality imagery and save the quick snaps that somebody might have taken on their phone for stories, because you want the feed to actually be of higher quality to encourage engagement with it. So as I said, you've got 3 seconds to capture somebody's attention. If there is a blurry race shot of somebody, I'm not really likely to take a second look at that and say, oh, this is actually the person I recognize. So just try and pay attention to that. Always make sure you have image rights that you are posting, and remember to credit where required. Copyright's a big issue. Photographers don't earn a lot of money, and so if you are either you're working with someone with your club or you have somebody contracted, and if there is something that you want to use, just contact them and ask them whether they'd mind you sharing it, because it's always better to ask in advance than to get threatened with, oh, paying a fine or whatever, and it's just out of courtesy. Same goes for video. I think that's a really big one, especially if it's a bigger event. Be mindful of, if normally something is on TV, and I don't know if Irish television or the BBC or whoever has rights to this, if you publish videos of that particular event, in theory you're breaching the broadcast restrictions there, and they could ask you to take it down. With individuals, they normally don't necessarily pursue this, but with organizations, they might go harder on that. So that's just something to be mindful of as well. Going back to the good old hashtags, you can hashtag more randomly there, if we were to say, but don't overdo it. So stick to the relevant ones. If it's about specific events, or if it is about a particular discipline, for example, then that makes a little more sense. But trying to follow the whole the way that some influencers operate in hashtag Instagood, hashtag like for comment, hashtag follow for whatever it is that people are using, I'd always say stick to 2 to 5 max on Instagram, and yeah, stick to the relevant ones. Geotag, I think we've touched upon earlier. If you are at a specific event, if it's at your local track, you can geotag that. But I always recommend geotagging public places such as competition venues rather than home addresses or meet hotels and so forth, because there are strange people out there and you never know who turns up at those addresses. So be mindful of that. Include faces. People really respond to what they know and who they know. So if you are talking about an athlete, rather than having them really far in the distance somewhere and not really visible, maybe make sure that their face is recognizable, because your followers will be more likely to see, this is the person I went to school with them, and to engage with that. Include other people's handles in post descriptions, because there is still although it's moved on where you can find it in the app, but there is still the discovery page. And so if you talk about somebody or another club or Athletics Ireland or something in the post and you add them, chances are higher that you will show up in the discovery page of people who follow that particular account. So if it is Athletics Ireland and you're tagging them and somebody else follows them and they go on the discovery page and they see who talks about them, maybe that post from you will show up there. Can't guarantee it, but it's more likely. And also by doing that, you're promoting their page and they might start promoting your page. So it's a bit of a I help you, you help me. As I said earlier, use stories for the behind the scenes aspect and content. And there are a lot of built-in tools that you can use to engage your followers. There's questions you can ask. If any of your athletes or if you yourself want to do Q&As, you can run polls about different topics. You can include GIFs. You attach music to something. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do without actually requiring any kind of editing skills and so forth. So it's really easy to use those. And Facebook.
Michelle, sorry, just when you're getting a drink, just to share a story on Instagram to give people a laugh. I followed Michelle on Instagram and we used to work together, and I think it was in London a few years ago. I actually assumed Michelle had a professional photographer with her at all times. And I'm in my mid-40s, and clearly Michelle isn't in her mid-40s. And I asked her on a bus to London Stadium one night, do you have a professional photographer? She goes, no, Pierce, they're my friends. That's what we do. We take photographs. And that's the reality of life. And I assume genuinely that you had somebody for these photographs. And that's Instagram. That's the new world that we're all trying to catch up on and stay relevant on. But that's the reality of the new modern social media world for everybody out there.
And I mean, the great thing in this day and age is that actually most mobile phones have really good cameras. So you don't need somebody with a professional camera. You can actually get decent, even in competition or training pictures on a mobile phone. So you don't have to be a professional photographer. You can just be a friend to get a decent picture. There's a question there. I'm just looking.
Yeah, so I sometimes have problems tagging club members in photographs from our club Facebook. It is not a problem if I publish event pictures from my personal account. So yeah, Kieran, I'm assuming you mean that, well, the club member has to follow your page for a start That's how you can tag them in. They may be friends with yours. Sorry, I shouldn't be answering this. Michelle, sorry. You answer it.
No, you made a good start there. A, they should be following your page, and B, they might not have their profile set to public. So depending on how public their personal profile is, they might not allow tagging. Whereas, as Piers says, if you're friends with them, they allow for it. So that's just something. If that doesn't work, it's because they don't want it to work. Facebook. Talked about that for quite a bit. One thing that you should always make sure with Facebook is your profile, again, is complete and up to date. The dreaded algorithm actually counts that in how it rates your page compared to other pages. So if you make sure that you have a profile picture, whether that's your club logo or something, if you have a banner at the top, which they encourage, they like, an about page, ideally a link to your website, all those things, if it's complete, it ranks you higher than if it doesn't really say anything about you. Because of the algorithm, when you're posting content on there, it's sometimes good to think about it more from a what's happening this week rather than what's happening today right now that I want people to instantly know about. That's the kind of information you put on Twitter because that's where people will instantly see it. But because Facebook doesn't show everyone everything on their timeline unless they go on your page to look, somebody might see something 2-3 days later than when you posted it. So if you can look at it from more of a perspective of okay, what do I want people to look at this week? What do I want them to be aware of? Then the chances that that particular post is relevant for a lot longer. So if somebody sees it 3 days later, but the information in there is still relevant now, they're also more likely to still share it with other people they think it's relevant to. So that's just Twitter is the what's happening right now. Facebook is the what's happening this week, and Instagram somewhere in between. Facebook is all about putting focus on telling stories in greater depth. It doesn't have a character limit. It wants you to post, as I say on the next point, longer video. It wants people to stay on the platform for longer. And so if you can have an engaging feature on somebody or have, as I said, longer information, explain why something is being done rather than just publishing dates, okay, on this date this is happening, without any context, it won't work as well as when you actually provide in-depth information. And it's about encouraging discussion around this, or it's about encouraging questions about this. It's not necessarily for you to talk to people, it's about talking with people. So if there's information that you're trying to get, or if there's thoughts that you're trying to get, it might help to ask a question, to open up the conversation to people. So that's the other thing to bear in mind on Facebook. And as I said, video is king, and the longer the better. So when you upload videos on there, it'll actually ask you through a series of items that when you upload it. So it'll say, have you put a title in? Have you given it a description? Are you including tags such as athletics or track and field? And then when you go on the next page, where once you've uploaded the video and before you publish it, it has on the right hand side a little checklist, and it'll say, have you done the title? Have you done the caption? Have you done the tags? And then there'll be 3 minutes. And when that's ticked, that's really good because the algorithm likes you publishing long form content. But it's not necessary, but it's a bonus. Any questions, anything here, or do I move on?
Yeah, keep going, Michelle. Thank you.
Now, a lot of this was about your club pages, and I just want to quickly touch upon how your own personal accounts can also contributing to positive conversation about spreading information about the subject that is athletics, that I think we're all quite passionate about. And so I just want to give 5 tips that you can also use on your own channels to promote the sport. The number one thing is to humanize your account. A lot of people, especially on Twitter, I think, just retweet. I go on an account and there is nothing from them, and it's just a retweet from that person and a retweet from that and a retweet from that, and I have no idea who this person is or what they sound like or what they're interested in. So give me a bit of information about who you are, but I mean, not everyone is in a line of work where they want everyone to know everything about them, but as well as information about your role or the work that you do, particularly in athletics, talk about some of the things that you do care about. And it doesn't have to be a broad subject line, and it doesn't have to be everything in your personal life, but it can be one or two niche subjects that you feel really strongly about. It can be the type of music that you listen to, or it can be the type of work that you do with your club, or the things that you do that you're really proud of. It can be your own sporting achievements and so forth. But it's about being a bit more human. And as I said, it doesn't mean that you need to overshare your personal life. There's a lot of things that don't belong on social media, and you don't have to publish them anywhere, but just add a bit of personality in there so people can relate a bit more and care about the stuff that you say. Amplify announcements. So if your club is announcing something, make sure that if that's something that is relevant to you or that you think could be relevant to the people that follow you, share it from your account as well. And then the one thing that's important there is that if you know this information before it's published, don't publish it before the official announcement goes out, because any official announcements should always come from official accounts first. So if you manage your club's account and your personal account, it should always go out from the club's account first, and then you can amplify it through your own account. You can either tweet it or post about it directly from your account. You can share the official announcement, but don't ever jump the gun. Also be aware of your club's official messaging or any restrictions that might in place. So again, as I said, restrictions earlier could be broadcast restrictions. So if you're live streaming an event and then you're standing there with your camera and maybe a broadcaster has paid for the rights to this, and then you're showing a race footage from your personal account, then that's not really helping the club. So you should be mindful of that. It can also be particular subjects that you are talking about that maybe aren't necessarily your opinions, but the question is that if you are associated with your club, do you really want to go on a rant about how terrible this decision from your club is, or do you maybe just not say anything in that instance, and choose to just let that particular topic be a subject that the club talks about. Any questions up till this point?
Yeah, just when you're getting a drink, actually, just to share like the amplification of announcements. So, for example, Athletics Ireland announced their national relay squads in the last 10 days. And somebody today, I think he's on the call, actually, John Connolly, picked out the 11 clubs from our region in Connacht and sent it to me. And I did a story then on Facebook and on Twitter. And all the clubs then start amplifying that and feel proud that their athletes are getting recognised. So it's a really easy way to promote the activities. There's nothing happening competition-wise, but just look for news all the time to keep yourself relevant. You know, there's another Facebook club like Finn Valley put out 10 stories a day. They're constantly putting out content, and because of that, huge following as well. So there are good examples. Galway City Harriers, another really good club on social media. Seamus Lynch does a great job. So just these are really good tips. I think everybody can take from them. And just for people who may leave, we'll share this presentation, and we'll also put the Zoom call on YouTube as well, so you hear back to it. But these are really good tips. So continue, Michelle.
Yep. So the number 3 is celebrate your network and the people that you work with. So I mean, there was 70 people, I think, roughly on this call, and see what everybody else is doing. And if a club is doing a great job, then there's no reason why you, even if you're from a different club, can't celebrate that and can't say they're doing an amazing job. This is something that we're also looking into doing and praising each other. And I think a lot of people don't utilize praise enough. We see a lot of people that use their Twitter accounts just to complain to brands. Ryanair, you've lost my luggage. Hermes or DPD, somebody didn't drop off the package. Tesco, the yogurt that I bought is moldy, or whatever it is. I don't care about the problems that you have with personal brands, and if that's the only way that you can communicate with them, that's fine. But your followers in general aren't interested in that. What you think about is actually what do you want your account to look like? Are you somebody that always complains, or are you somebody that gives praise and that shares great examples of work? So I think, yeah, to reinforce connection, share congratulations about people's work and achievements, whether that's results off the track, is always a great way to spread positivity. Recommend good reads, listens, watches. Don't know whether watches is the right plural here, but I'm foreign, so. But don't just retweet something, but also tell people why you like it and give credit where it's due. As I said, sometimes you go on somebody's account and all they do is retweet. Then I'm thinking, I don't have to follow that person, but I should just follow the people that they constantly retweet. But if they're telling me why this is relevant or add some value to that particular piece of content, it gives me far more reason to look at it. And normally, the way that especially Twitter works, you recognize somebody's handle or you recognize their little face next to it. So again, going back to the 3 seconds on somebody's timeline, you flick through the content and you recognize their face and you see that they've tweeted about something. If you only retweet, it's only the person who you've retweeted that shows up on their feed. And if they don't know them or if they don't recognize them, they're not going to read about it. So just think about how you can recommend other good content. And it can also just be by sharing a link to a great newspaper article or a link to another story. And the last one is about joining conversations, and we've talked about hashtags in great extent, but whether it's your topic of expertise, whether that is athletics or something else that you're really, really passionate about it, do join in the conversation because you might have something great to add to that. And if you are, even if it's a really niche subject, there's probably a conversation about this out there. So there's no reason why, if you know or understand what it is that you're talking about, why you shouldn't be allowed to join those conversations. And the last bit, and Piers will know this because I had it in the old presentation that last year he was part of, is don't say anything online that you wouldn't want plastered on a billboard with your face on it, which comes from marketing and technology expert Erin Burry. And the reason why I'm saying this is because it's happened, and we've seen it time and time again. There was a great campaign led by Donkeys. Me as a German formerly living in the UK obviously had to make a Brexit reference, but they picked out a lot of social media posts, loads of tweets and so forth, published them all over the UK. And it's not just people trying to troll politicians who do this, it's also brands. Burger King did a massive campaign in France where they actually picked out people's tweets that were somehow complaining about Burger King or moaning about something and plastered them on giant billboards all over France. So the day Burger King will open a restaurant in my city, pigs will fly. And the line that Burger King added to this was a tip for you, never become a fortune teller. And there was another one, if Burger King ever opens in Lille, I'll buy you all a meal deal, true story. And Burger King said, dear this person, it's a good thing no one printed your tweet on a banner, and they're opening in Lille soon. So that's a little lesson to take from that. And as I said, sometimes if you're very passionate about something, but you're not sure how it will be perceived, write the tweet, save it in a draft, and go back to it 10 minutes later and see whether you still feel that strongly about it. And that's it. Any more questions?
Michelle, thank you so much. I think that was really, really good for everybody. And it's probably the first professional lesson a lot of people on the call have had. It was really, really great. Just 2 points I'd like people to take away from here. First one relates to the inauguration yesterday. Joe Biden's wife wore a lovely green coat, and Aer Lingus, whoever is the tweeter for Aer Lingus, put a photograph today of a pilot and an Aer Lingus cabin staff, and then had Joe Biden and his wife and said who wore it better, which they probably thought was funny, but it got so much criticism. If you ever go down through the comments on Twitter and Aer Lingus when you have time afterwards, just talk about landing so badly after the inauguration. So just be careful about that. And the big thing I want everyone to remember is, from my side, if you care, you share. And everybody here, it cares about athletics, and we care about Ireland, about the sport. Don't be afraid to put tweets out there. I mean, we haven't had competition in a few months, but there's lots happening. So remember that maxim: if you care, you share, and keep promoting the sport. I think all the questions that come in, Michelle, I think everyone's just saying thank you, and it's really good to get that response.
A good one that I might just quickly jump on, which is from Danielle, is with nothing happening in the sports world, any ideas on how to keep page content going? And yes, that is a very good question, and I think one that people working in the industry have struggled with. There's last year, I think people, when we first went into the first lockdown, a lot of people were getting really creative, and there was home workouts being shared and all these kind of things. And now everyone seems to just be over it and hope it's done soon. But there's still demand for interesting content out there. I think something that could be really interesting, depending on who's following you or who's part of your club, something that could be really interesting is thinking about parents who might be at home homeschooling, or who are struggling with keeping their kids busy, giving them little activities, whether that's little home exercises they can do, whether that is any kind of quizzes that you can provide, whether that's about the club, any of those, anything that can be related to the sport, but that can also be used in an educational way, tends to work really well. World Athletics did a whole campaign or series of content last year called Athletics at Home, where they did coloring in and puzzle activities and quizzes, and I think there was even an indoor escape game all about athletics. So there's a lot of content that you can actually create and can keep people informed. And the other thing that's always really, really good to do is just talking about inspiring people, because especially in times like this, people need positive stories. So if there are people in your clubs, or if there's anyone in your community that's doing a great job, praise them and talk about them, because that's the kind of content I think everybody is craving a bit at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And you're dead right. Just to give it maybe an idea, we did a 60 seconds with all the athletes, and I just sent out a Word document and let the athletes fill it back in. You know, favorite food, best training session, favorite memory, why you got involved in athletics. If you were president of World Athletics tomorrow, what would you do, etc. They're on the TUM Juveniles Facebook page. But there's actually quite a few good suggestions in the chat box as well. So maybe I won't cut the call off for everybody, but we can end the call and people can go into the chat box and get some ideas, if that's okay. And if there's no other comments, after taking up an hour and 20 minutes of your time, Michelle, we're eternally grateful. You can see the response. People are really, really grateful. You've always got a home in Ireland. And I want to thank everybody. You know, 80 people on the call. Really good to get that kind of information shared. And Michelle, thank you so much for your time, and thanks to all our members as well for being so engaging. It was a very positive experience, and good luck for everybody for the rest of the season. Hopefully we get back to competing quite soon. Thanks very much, Michelle. You're great.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.
Cheers, guys. I'll leave the box open for everybody. It's good to see you all, and I'll stop the recording as well. Cheers.